6 months into the war with Iran, the Trump administration is yet to achieve any of its strategic goals and is struggling to find an exit. The administration's stated objectives, ranging from ending Iran's nuclear program to regime change, reflect decades of U.S. misdiagnosis of the threat that Iran poses to the United States and Tehran's strategic ambitions. In a new paper, Defense Priorities Middle East Program Director Rose Kelanic explains how U.S. policy and its presence in the Middle East has created a security dilemma between Iran and the United States, one that this war has made worse. In a moment, Rose and I are going to talk about that paper and what the U.S. should do next. Here are 3 things you need to know. Hey, Rose, thanks for joining me today to talk about your new paper and the U.S. Iran security dilemma. I was wondering if you could start off by just talking a little bit about how U.S. policy and its presence in the Middle East has fostered this security dilemma between the two countries, how it's contributed to the war, and also if you could just start off by explaining what this international relations concept of a security dilemma is.
Sure. So thanks, Adam, so much for doing this video with me so we can talk about the paper.
Yeah.
So the paper talks about something called a security dilemma, which is an international relations concept that makes the observation that sometimes countries that are not inherently aggressive do things to make themselves more secure that might look aggressive to other countries, like they arm, right? They build weapons of various sorts. They base their forces near other countries, et cetera. They're doing it for defensive purposes, but another country looking at what that behavior is might construe it as offense, and that country will respond by taking their own defensive measures that then look like offense to the first country. And it can lead you to a situation where you have these spirals of arms races or other measures that are interpreted as offensive when they're really defensive. I use the concept in the paper to explain why the U.S. Iran antagonism has gotten as bad as it's gotten over the past several decades. And I argue that the U.S. and Iran are locked in a security dilemma. The United States has bases throughout the Middle East. We've expanded those bases since the 1990s. In 2003, we invaded Iraq, which neighbors Iran. In 2001, we invaded Afghanistan, which also neighbors Iran. We've said things like we want the Iranian government to be overthrown. We've positioned military forces in the region and left them there. We've done a lot of things that make Iran nervous, that have convinced Iran that we are out to get them long before this war came, and we actually did try to get them, right? Iran has responded to those things that the U.S. has seen as purely defensive, construing it as offense, and they have taken measures like building missiles. That's probably the most obvious one. They build missiles to deter the United States and Israel from attacking them, not because Iran is necessarily aggressive, but because they interpret the U.S. as aggressive due to our presence. And so this leads to this cycle where both sides take more and more offensive measures, and now we've actually come to a full-scale war, unfortunately.
So, how has this war made that situation even worse? And can you talk about how it's also increased Iran's strategic leverage?
Yeah. So the war has basically confirmed to people in Iran, rightly or wrongly, that the U.S. is out to get them, right? Like this has convinced Iran, really, we were lying all along about not being aggressively oriented, not being interested in overthrowing the regime. To them, this looks like proof that the U.S. is aggressive and is out to get them. And so that's going to create incentives for Iran to respond with increasing its military forces and doing things to try to make itself more secure. That's going to make things look scarier to the United States, whether it's showing that they have leverage over the Strait of Hormuz and can threaten shipping through it. There's some possibility that Iran could try to restart its nuclear program. That's building nuclear weapons is something that states often do in response to a security dilemma. They might be doing it just for their own security, but from the U.S. perspective, it looks offensive. Overall, the war has strengthened Iran's hand because it showed that the regime is resilient to U.S. and Israeli air power. It showed how vulnerable U.S. bases in the Middle East are, and it allowed Iran to demonstrate, I think, even more leverage over Hormuz than observers realized it had, and that perhaps Iran even realized that it had.
Right.
That it can essentially shut down shipping, not by attacking every ship that goes through, but by attacking enough ships that most shippers don't want to go through the strait, and that effectively closes it.
Right. Yeah, in some ways, it would almost be surprising if whenever this war is said and done, if Iran didn't decide to, enhance its nuclear program and get closer to a weapon, if not get one. Um,
Absolutely. And most of the progress they've made in their nuclear program has been in response to provocations by the United States. So when we've done things like pull out of the JCPOA, the previous nuclear deal, they responded by enriching uranium to a higher percentage, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, right. So, the US seems to be struggling to figure out a way to get out of this war. There are a lot of different proposals. Just yesterday, the Trump administration said it's going to, ramp up economic pressure on the regime. What do you think the best course of action is for the United States now?
The United States needs to get out. They need to end the war with Iran. Iran has shown it has this leverage. The leverage depends on geography, which we can't change, and military capabilities that are cheap and easy for Iran to build to threaten shipping through the strait. That's not something the US can undo. So the US needs to either make a deal with Iran to reopen Hormuz in exchange for some concessions, perhaps by the US, perhaps some by Iran, or the US can just simply stop the war, drop the blockade, leave, go home, etc. And then more broadly, this sort of hostility was created in large part by a US military presence that has long outlived its usefulness. Washington has known for years it needs to get out of the Middle East. And there are other theaters that matter more, like Asia. And US bases are, we've seen from this war, extremely vulnerable and basically liabilities that the US can't defend in the region. If the US does pull back forces from the region, I expect that that will make the relationship between the US and Iran less hostile over time, because I do think it's based on the security dynamic and the fact that the US has frightened Iran for decades, just like Iran has frightened us.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the long-term costs of this war are going to be staggering for the United States. But if there is a silver lining, it may be that ultimately it forced the U.S. to make this strategic decision that it seems like policymakers have known for a long time was the right one, which is retrenchment from the region.
Absolutely. We kicked the can down the road for too long, and now it's catching up with us. We could have left on our own, on our own
Right.
willpower, like our own way in a much better way. And we didn't do that. And now events, I think, are forcing our hand, but it's what needs to happen.
Right. Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, thank you a lot, Rose, for joining me today. I want to encourage everybody to head over to defensepriorities.org and check out your paper on this security dilemma and how the war has made it worse. It's a really fascinating read. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you.